Um, and the caveat for this is these are minimal standards. Many police departments have additional standards besides these. So this is the minimum that's required by law. Peace officers in Ohio are not required to have any of the following: high school diploma or GED, not required. Drug screening, not required. Psychological exam, not required. Voice stress, polygraph, not required. Physical fitness standard, not required before someone enters the academy. They're required afterwards. Now, again, these are minimal. The vast majority of police officers in the state of Ohio, I am sure, have a high school diploma, and many of them have advanced education beyond that. So no one should take away from this that we have police officers a lot of police officers who don't fit any of these criteria, or none of the screening has been done, because that's simply not true. But what we're talking about is the minimum required by law. So no GED, no school diploma, and none of the rest is required. Amber, you want to put the next one up? This is how Ohio compares to other states in regard to the one specific qualification, and that is, do you need a GED or do you need or a high school diploma? You'll see that Ohio is in a unique situation with Louisiana, Hawaii, and Ohio. We're the only three states that we could determine that do not require a high school diploma or a GED. Now let's look at, we're going to move now to, let me just talk about recommendations. The working group in this report recommended that all of the criteria that was held up in the last one. No, yeah, that previous one. All the criteria in the previous one, the working group's recommendation is they be set as state standards. So all of these things would be done before someone entered the academy. So this would be pre-academy. High school diploma, drug screening, psychological exam, voice stress / polygraph, physical fitness standard, all being done before someone entered the academy. I would say that in probably all of the closed academies, that's being done today, or at least most of it is being done today. In the open academies, it's generally not being done. There may be exceptions. Let me now move from qualifications before the academy to the second area that the commission, or that our working group studied, and that is basic training. And let's look at what's required, a number of the basic training hours. Ohio requires currently 605 hours. We took our neighboring states. Kentucky is 888, West Virginia 835, Pennsylvania 754, Indiana 600, Michigan 594. So Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, as far as just numbers, are in the same general category, but we're way behind Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Again, those are just the hours that are required in basic training to become a police officer. All right, let's look at this next exhibit, if we could. These are the hours by state. Again, we're, not too far down. You start with Hawaii, which is over 1,000 hours, and you go on down. But that gives you some indication of how Ohio ranks in regard to that. Next one, Amber. Again, now here's the recommendation in regard to hours. This working group recommends our current as 605 hours for basic training, The recommendation you will find in this report is to substantially increase basic training hours. The working group talked specifically about 3 different areas that would be primarily responsible for the substantial increase of those hours. I'm going to ask Dr. Wilkinson to come up here and to briefly explain those 3.
Thank you, Attorney General. The scenario-based training is something that we got very familiar with over the course of our deliberations. And what we want to show and to make sure included in basic training are opportunities for potential new law enforcement officers to better understand the science of subject control. How do you manage a person, a perpetrator, for example? How do you de-escalate a situation with a person who might be mentally ill or might demonstrate tendencies of mental illness or any kind of other erratic behavior? How do you look at judgmental shooting? We actually had a situation where we brought in simulators so that we could practice when to shoot and when not to shoot. As many of you know, law enforcement officers are sometimes faced with split-second decisions in order to decide whether to use a firearm or a taser, and it's very difficult work. So we want a new law enforcement officers or who go through basic training to be able to go through these scenarios so they can better understand what they might be confronted with. And then use of force. Use of force is what we hear in the news every day. What is excessive use of force? How do you make sure that the force you use is the appropriate force or the appropriate use of force, and that it is something that you've learned while you were going through your basic training. So that basically talks about the scenario-based training. There are other scenario-based trainings, such as how you use a vehicle, maneuvering. So there are a lot of different situations where we can train real-life situations based on scenarios. The community police relations is, of course, very important. In some respects, it's why this group exists. Why are in terms of whether or not law enforcement officers really have a second nature to understand the dynamics of what's happening in the communities. And we're going to try to get to that through some other processes. Implicit bias is a science now that's developing. The Ohio State University is really perfecting the science of implicit bias. Implicit bias is basically how do you understand your own personal biases that might not surface in your work, or that might surface in your work and you might not even know about it. It's different than discrimination or prejudice because you may not even be conscious that these biases exist. But there are ways to understand those and there are ways to manage them. We're not asking people to get rid of their biases. We're wanting people to understand what they are. And other issues related to diversity and of different communities across the state. Procedural justice. We want new cadets to have some understanding that the community expects justice and that they want to be able to explain the way they need to be able to understand the decisions that they make regarding policing in the various communities across the state. So we really want them to understand that what they're doing is legitimate and not be afraid to demonstrate certain kinds of law enforcement techniques and interactions, but we want them to understand that the community is a big part of this. So the whole idea of interpersonal communication is a big deal with regard to procedural justice. Mental health, obviously, since we had a subcommittee on mental health, the mental health issue is just huge in terms of being able to understand the various dynamics, the behaviors of a person who might demonstrate mental illness tendencies or developmental disabilities tendencies or any other kind of erratic behavior. Sometimes persons are on various types of drugs and might make them demonstrate erratic behavior. So how can we get law enforcement to be able to decipher through all of this and manage from a law enforcement perspective, be able to manage it. So we want citizens, at different points in the state to be able to help with that, to be able to have a contribution to how we deal with community perception of how we're dealing with law enforcement handling of persons with mental illness. We've included the executive director of NAMI Ohio, and we have a lot of expertise in the state to be able to assist us with this effort. So we're not just going through the motions of doing these things because they're buzzwords to say. We're actually looking at the science of how all this works, and so that it can be integrated in a very sophisticated way into training of law enforcement officers in the state of Ohio.